In today's episode, we're discussing a term we've all heard, especially lately, narcissist. We've all heard people say, oh, he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. But how many of us truly understand what it means? And how many are qualified to make that call? Do you know the difference between narcissistic personality style and disorder? Did you know narcissism exists on a spectrum? While we're not psychologists or clinicians or qualified to diagnose, we've researched the topic extensively and want to share our findings with you. There's a lot to unpack, so let's jump in.
Welcome to Tell Me More and Then Some.
I'm Alina.
And I'm Angeline.
Join us as we dive deep into the topics that fuel our conscious evolution and keep us learning as students of life.
We invite you to come along and share the ride. We hope you're empowered to learn and grow into the best and most authentic version of yourself. We're so happy you're here. Let's go. Hi, Alina.
Hi, lovely.
It's good to be with you again.
It's a pleasure, as always.
As always.
I think this topic is one that we've wanted to discuss for a while. But obviously, we're not clinicians or psychologists. And so I think we're both a little like, well, we don't know enough about it to talk about it. But it's definitely something that we're passionate about. It's information that we really want to share with the listeners because narcissists really impact our lives. And we run into them all the time.
They're among us.
Unless you live in a box, they live among us, right?
Yeah.
Especially in relationships, right? Like, I'd love for both of us to maybe give some tips or some personal experiences around like what we've seen, what to avoid. It is really complex. So I think the listeners should sort of brace themselves because you're going to be going back and forth like, well, am I a narcissist? Is my partner, you're going to be questioning a lot of things. And so just keep in mind that it's a personality thing, right?
Right.
And again, we're going to talk about it, but.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. I'm sure we've said this before, but the way that we record our episodes, we kind of flip and take turns on different topics that really intrigue us or one of us has a lot of energy around. And Alina, I know you have a lot of energy around this topic. I know it's something that's been of interest to you.
I've been surrounded by a narcissist. I've won a gold medal in the most amount of interactions with narcissists.
Yeah.
And which, also has made me self-reflect on like, what is it in me that either gets attracted to narcissists or what is it about me that attracts them to me?
Yeah.
Right? So narcissism, just to describe what it is, right? It's an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, arrogance, selfishness, a need to control or dominate others, envy, and that can be envy of others or thinking that others envy you. A lack of empathy. And then it could be like what they call like variable empathy in that, one can say, but no, this person shows me empathy. And it's like, it's learned, right? And we'll get into that. And then, as we said, it's often used casually, but it has a clinical definition, and it can range from personality traits to a full-fledged personality disorder, and that's known as narcissistic personality disorder, also known as NPD, right? And so we want you to think about that. There's these characteristics or traits, but in order for it to be a disorder, it's something that needs to be diagnosed, right? So if you go to a clinician or a psychologist, they would have to diagnose it. And there's something called the DSM-5, it's a diagnostic manual that trained clinicians use to make a diagnosis. And it's marked by the patterns I just mentioned, such as grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy or variable empathy, which again, we'll get into. And it begins in early childhood, and it's present in a variety of contexts. And then the last thing I'll say, sorry, about the DSM is there's, I guess, 9 characteristics for the diagnosis, and you would have to have at least 5 of those characteristics to be diagnosed, excuse me, as a narcissist.
Yes, that's an important thing to mention.
Yeah.
That was a question I know I had.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go through the characteristics of narcissism that Alina just alluded to. First one is a grandiose sense of self-importance. So exaggerating achievements and talents and really expecting to be recognized as superior. The next one is preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. The third is believing they are quote unquote special and can only be understood by other special or high status people. Fourth, requiring excessive admiration, sense of entitlement, expecting special treatment or automatic compliance with their wishes, exploiting others for personal gain without regard for their feelings or needs. Lack of empathy, so unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, or if they seem empathic, it's because they've learned that they can use that for their own gain. Terrifying. Envy of others or believing others are envious of them. And last but not least, arrogant behaviors or attitudes.
Yeah.
And so what you were saying, Alina, is based on these 9 characteristics or traits, if you display or embody 5 of them, of the 9, then that's when you could potentially be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Got it. So it's like pathological at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the terms in our research that, like, one of the things that's sort of a common thread is this sense of entitlement. And that empathy piece, that's a really hard one, right? Because we're empathic people and it's just hard to wrap your head around that. And even in my own experience with people, I'm like, but are they narcissists? They're narcissists, but they seem empathetic. And it's like, no. They know exactly what to say and exactly what to do because they know empathy sells, right?
Yes.
So I want us to also think of narcissism on a spectrum. So at one end, individuals can display mild narcissistic traits such as vanity, self-centeredness, and this need for admiration, while at the other end, they may exhibit full-blown NPD, right? So you can have these mild traits, but that doesn't mean that you have this disorder, right? So individuals that are low on the spectrum, they may have occasional self-centered thoughts or behaviors, but they don't dominate their life, right? Also, these individuals can have healthy relationships. I think that's another big one. And they can have this like balanced view of themselves. Moderate narcissism is this occasional arrogance or self-focus, but also these individuals are capable of empathy and they have balanced relationships. High narcissism, right? So the right end of the spectrum. These people are prone to arrogance, entitlement, and they need to dominate others. And they may form relationships, but they're going to be shallow or exploitative or temporary, right? And then narcissistic personality disorder, that's the end of the spectrum. And we're going to get into the different kinds. But it definitely impairs relationships and functioning in various areas of their lives.
Yeah. It's funny, as I hear you talk about this, I like you said, like sometimes you think like, am I a narcissist? Is it true that like many of us can have bits of narcissism within us, right? Like self-centered thoughts, behaviors, caring what others think, etc. I'm just like, this seems pervasive just across society.
Yeah.
So is it possible to say many of us have these little bits of traits within us?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you have the disorder.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, right? Like you can have certain traits, right? But especially if they're on that low end of the spectrum,
Right.
you know, if you're not hurting other people, I think that's the big one for me. Like you can feel a little entitled, right?
Yeah.
But you're not running around the world treating people horrifically and getting joy out of controlling others, dominating others, manipulating, right? Like that's when it gets on, sort of on the right end of the spectrum into the disorder. And then we'll get into certain types that like malignant, that border psychopathy. You can become a full-blown psychopath when you get on the opposite end. I know, like we can kind of,
Jeez.
yeah, giggle at this, but these people are terrifying.
Absolutely.
But yes, you're right. Because you and I will kind of joke and be like, is this narcissistic? Come here. I need some validation. Right. But this analogy that I heard by Dr. Ramani, she's like the leading expert in narcissism. She said something like a carrot is not soup. A carrot is just one ingredient that of many that you need to make the soup, right? So if the soup is the narcissist or the person who has narcissistic personality disorder with all of these traits, just that one carrot doesn't make them a narcissist, right? It's one trait of many, right?
Yes. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different types.
The different types. Yeah.
If that's okay.
Of course. Let's go into it. So as Alina mentioned, narcissism manifests in different forms and degrees from mild tendency to more extreme and pathological. So the first type we'll talk about is this grandiose or overt narcissism. They often have an exaggerated sense of their own significance, their abilities and achievements, and they might present themselves as superior and demand admiration and validation from others. They have a sense of entitlement and expect special treatment and may become angry or frustrated when others don't meet those high expectations. These individuals are often outwardly assertive, and they may engage in attention-seeking behaviors to ensure others acknowledge their quote-unquote greatness. Yeah. They lack empathy. And despite their outward false confidence, grandiose narcissists tend to be insensitive to the feelings and needs of others. Mm-hmm. So again, what we were just talking about with empathy.
Yeah, and that false confidence, like they look so confident, right? Especially the grandiose type. Like they're good looking, they're shiny. They just look like, wow, this person's real. I think of like a CEO or some famous people that we all know, whether they're, actors or politicians, right?
Yeah.
But that confidence or that false confidence is there to really mask this deep, deep insecurity and this deep shame, right? I'm going to cover all of that up and appear like this bright, shiny, confident person. But it's really in an effort to mask and suppress all of this insecurity and all of this shame.
Yeah. And why don't we look into what this looks like in a relationship? So let's say a partner with grandiose narcissism regularly brags about their career successes, their physical appearance, their status, and they might belittle their partner for not achieving similar things. Mm-hmm. So they might make major life decisions without consulting their partner, expecting them to just, quote unquote, fall in line with their plans. And if the partner voices concerns, the grandiose narcissist will likely dismiss their feelings, saying something to the effect of, you don't understand because you're not as successful as I am. So it's kind of this like, I'm better than you mentality. Mm-hmm. And that can have very impactful ramifications on a relationship, right? That relationship can become one-sided, where the narcissist expects constant admiration and the other partner's needs are ignored or devalued. And if the other partner doesn't feed their ego sufficiently, then the narcissist might devalue them or even end the relationship. And I feel like there's something here around like love bombing. You know how we've kind of talked about love bombing. Like, what does it mean when people say things like they love? Does that have anything to do with narcissism?
I am the expert in being love bombed. Like,
The expert.
it's crazy. Like that person that you meet, right? Who right out the gate is just like, oh, my beautiful, princess, and just the most ridiculous words, which, when you're young, you fall right into it. But then even as we get older, there are a lot of people that fall into that too, right? Like, oh, the chemistry was palpable, and they're texting you morning, noon, and night and just telling you how great you are and how beautiful you are and all these things. And there's something in the back of your mind that's like, this is weird. Like, this is a lot. They're telling you about their feelings for you really quickly. And you're like, how do you like me so quickly? Or how do you love me so quickly? You don't barely even know me, a few weeks into the relationship.
Right.
And so when you see those red flags, they're red flags. And you should really stop and question, what's this person really trying to do? Because they're going to love bomb just to dominate, right? And then once they have you, man, they can be really cruel. And so that's what it is. It's really like they know what to do to get you, just so they can tear you down, which just, again, sounds crazy. Excuse me. But that's what essentially love bombing is.
Yeah. Right. Obviously, like, I know the way that you're describing it sounds extreme, and it is extreme, but it's done so covertly, I feel, where you miss it. You can miss it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's good to be aware of this stuff.
I was really proud of myself. I dated a couple of narcissists, and one of them really was destructive. You question yourself, your own sanity. They, the word gaslighting, right? They gaslight you. They really make you question yourself. Like, wow. And then they're really charming. So all your friends like them, right?
Oof, yes.
Especially the shiny, grandiose type. And so then you're like, well, if everybody likes them, it's got to be me.
Right.
Like, am I the problem?
Right.
And so anyhow, I dated a couple of narcissists, and I just became really good. And one of the things they had in common was the love bombing.
Oh, interesting.
And so then met this other guy, talked to him a couple of times over the phone, and then I was like, this sounds familiar.
Alarms.
And so I'm like, let me just get on one more call with him before I go out with him. And sure enough, I was like, wow, dodged a bullet.
Spotted.
Never went out with him. And all the things I expected him to do, like text me and sweet talk and this and that. I was like, no, not falling for that.
That's wild.
And I just wanted to add, social media, dating apps, like these, I hate to say, especially dating apps, they are a breeding ground for narcissists. And they will find you. If you're, I had like, looking for kindness, like they seek you, right? If you're a highly empathetic person, if you're a successful person, if you're an attractive person, like there are just certain things that they look for, because they want you to be challenging. They don't want their targets to be easy, right?
Yeah.
And so they're going to target you, and a part of you may be like, wow, this person's being persistent. This person must really like me, right? So just watch out for those things, because I feel like most people, like that's how they date today, right? Is on these apps. So beware.
Okay, so let's move on to the second type of narcissism, which is vulnerable narcissism. And vulnerable narcissists exhibit self-centeredness, but they're often more anxious, insecure, or easily wounded. They might feel underappreciated or victimized, and they're hypersensitive to criticism. So if we think about this in a relationship, a partner with vulnerable narcissism might say things like, I always do everything for you, but you never notice how much I sacrifice. When their partner expresses frustration or tries to address the issue, The vulnerable narcissist might respond with a passive-aggressive remark or retreat into silence, expecting their partner to come back and apologize. The impact on the relationship here is it might feel emotionally exhausting, with the narcissist constantly seeking reassurance and admiration, and the partner might feel like they're walking on eggshells, unsure of how to express any criticisms without triggering this emotional outburst. And the narcissist's need for constant emotional validation can overwhelm their partner and make the relationship, like we said, feel emotionally draining.
Yeah.
And again, like, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that you could think like, wait, I do this, like there are times where, I do tell my husband like, hey, if I'm like exhausted one day, I'm like, I do so much, like, and you don't say thank you. Like, you don't notice the invisible labor that I do. So again, I go back to like, it makes me question, do I have narcissism? And I think your carrot analogy,
I was going to say,
helpful.
It's just the carrot,
it's just
girl.
one ingredient.
Or maybe it's the carrot and the onion.
Right.
But it's not.
But also, I think you've asked this, like, do you display empathy?
Mm-hmm.
Or what's the other one? Empathy and then
entitlement.
There we go. Yes.
Entitlement is a really common theme.
Yeah.
And again, you're not running around the world being awful to other humans.
No.
Right? Like,
that's a good distinction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing about these types is like that whole envy, right? Like, they hate going on social media and seeing other people succeed or doing well. Like, they're envious of that, but they don't do anything to change it. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if anything, it's just like, oh, why does that person have that and I don't? Like, again, I'm entitled, so I should have that too. And layered with all the other things, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about the third type, which is the most terrifying. Like, this scares me beyond my comprehension.
Yeah.
The malignant narcissist. And they say that this is like, it borders psychopathy, right? So it's like there's a malignant narcissist and then there's the psychopath. And I almost feel like they kind of go hand in hand, because when we researched like famous people that were narcissists, Adolf Hitler came up. And in my mind, Adolf Hitler was 1000% a psychopath, right? But it also had him as a malignant narcissist. So these types, they exhibit extreme and toxic traits of narcissism, but with these additional characteristics that make their behavior more harmful and definitely more destructive to others, with this combination of other traits. So in addition to that, they display this excessive need for, in addition to this excessive need for admiration, lack of empathy, grandiosity, and entitlement, which we see in the other types, they also like to exploit others. So they will manipulate and they will use people as tools for their own benefit without regard for the other person's well-being. And unlike a more passive narcissist, a malignant narcissist may display open aggression, anger, or hostility towards those who challenge them or don't provide the admiration that they crave. So they want to control others. Sometimes they use intimidation, threats, or emotional abuse to maintain their power and dominance in relationships. They often have a distrust of others and may believe that others are trying to undermine or harm them, even when no such threats exist. In extreme cases, malignant narcissists may take pleasure in the suffering or distress of others, using cruelty or humiliation to elevate their own sense of superiority. They can also be vindictive if someone challenges their ego or doesn't comply with their desires. They may also seek revenge. And in relationships or in work environments, malignant narcissists can be highly destructive. Their actions can lead to emotional harm, exploitation, as well as psychological damage to others. And the key difference between a, quote unquote, regular narcissist and a malignant narcissist is the level of harm and manipulative behavior, with the malignant type being more dangerous, cruel, and self-serving. Again, I think this one is probably the most extreme. Not probably.
Yeah. I think
it's pretty extreme.
I think so.
So,
I guess, can I ask, would like a physically abusive partner count? Can they be malignant narcissists?
if they're physically abusive and all of these other things.
Right. Okay.
They can be a physically abusive alcoholic.
I see.
That doesn't make them a narcissist, right?
Right. I always try to simplify in my head, and
yeah,
it's not simple.
Absolutely.
So what's a good scenario for this one?
They love gaslighting. They love making the other person question their reality. So, for instance, they may accuse their partner of being crazy when the partner expresses legitimate concerns or reminds them of how lucky they are to be with someone so amazing, right? They might also use physical intimidation or even threaten to leave, or just anything to keep their partner in a constant state of fear or anxiety.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to people who are in a relationship with this type of a narcissist.
Yeah.
And again, there can be varying degrees of a malignant narcissist, right? You could be lower or higher on the spectrum, but they're just impossible. And for the person on the other side of this relationship, it's obviously very toxic. There's a lot of emotional abuse, manipulation, exploitation. The partner can feel trapped and powerless and just constantly on the defensive to, avoid angering the narcissist. And I just think of this person's light being completely dimmed.
Yeah.
Right? Just constantly in a state of, what do I do to appease my partner who I can never appease, right? I can see it really impacting your confidence, self-worth, all of those things. And meanwhile, the malignant narcissist shows absolutely no remorse for their harmful behaviors. And again, my heart just really goes out to folks who are in these types of relationships. And experts will say to the person on the other side, get out, right? There's no changing this person. There's no therapy that can help this person. Oh, and that's another thing. Narcissists don't do therapy. I think it's 60% of them actually drop out of therapy if they go to therapy, right?
Wow.
And if they go to couples therapy, the whole time they're going to focus on the other person. They're not the problem.
Ever.
They don't have the problem.
Right.
The partner is the problem, right? If they only did X, Y, and Z, then we wouldn't be here. And from my understanding, even for a clinician, like an expert in the field, it's hard for them. It takes a while for them to figure out if someone's a narcissist.
Yeah.
So
it's scary.
It is scary.
Stuff.
What's the next type?
The next one is, this is a very interesting one.
Yeah, we're having a really hard time with this one.
Yes. Communal narcissism. So get this. There's someone who seek admiration and validation through the image of being selfless, caring, and devoted to others, often in ways that are publicly visible. So unlike traditional narcissists who might focus on personal achievements or appearances, communal narcissists derive their sense of self-worth from how they're perceived as kind, helpful, or altruistic. So think, nonprofit, someone that starts a nonprofit, someone that does, I don't know, pastor at a church.
Mm-hmm.
However, their motivations are still rooted in selfishness and a need for recognition rather than genuine empathy or concern for others. So, like we said, like an example is like a communal narcissist might volunteer at charities or become involved in social causes, but they focus more on being seen as a hero or getting praise for their efforts than on the actual outcome of the work or the needs of those they are trying to help. So, in short, they're concerned with how their image as a good and caring person can serve their own needs for admiration, while often lacking the true empathy and selflessness that their actions might outwardly suggest. And this, I mean, eye-opening, right? Like I started thinking about people that I know, someone that I used to date, and I've never thought about the underlying motives of what a communal narcissist can have. I don't know what I just said. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it blew my mind. And it makes a lot of sense now when I think about it, because I think about the behaviors in addition to them, like this one again, like I'm trying to be careful, but like this one person that I know, you look at their resume or their LinkedIn, they are the most caring person in the world. And I dated them, and there's definitely narcissism in there. And it's about this sense of there's grandiosity of like, I am this amazing, perfect specimen, as well as I help people, but literally zero empathy in the relationship, like entitlement at a 10 out of 10. So I'm very thrown.
And that need for recognition, right?
Oh,
The
yes.
fact that they wouldn't be so kind and helpful if no one's looking,
No.
right? If no one's looking and no one is saying anything, they're not doing that work,
No.
right? A good example here too is like a mayor of a town who is just this like pillar for like great humanity, and he does all this work, and everybody. I recently watched that movie. It Ends with Us.
Yes.
And she goes to her father's funeral, and she can't say one good thing about him. And he would go home and beat the shit out of his wife, and apparently do all these horrific things. But then he's the mayor, and everybody loves him, right? Someone like that is what I think of when I think of a communal narcissist.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think is it accurate to say the image that you see on the outside, it does not match when you get to know them, right? Like it's the facade comes down.
Yes.
It's a facade. Okay, great.
And I also think like, yeah, they might be better, CEOs or maybe friends or acquaintances than they ever are in romantic relationships or even as parents, right? So
Great.
the last type is the somatic narcissist. And this is a subtype of narcissistic personality disorder. And it's characterized by an excessive focus on their physical appearance, sexual appeal, and their body. And this type of narcissist derives their self-worth and validation primarily from their physical traits, such as their looks, fitness, sexual desirability, and the attention they receive because of these factors. They often view their body as a tool for gaining admiration and manipulating others. And I just always think of social media when I think of this type of narcissist, right? So this is the person who's, constantly posting photos of their toned body on social media, or talking about their workouts or their dieting habits, and becoming upset if they don't receive compliments on their appearance. They could exhibit just a lot of things that relate to their physical appearance, right? And again, entitlement, low on the empathy or no empathy. Like all of those things also weave in here as well.
Yeah. And so you're saying the tool that they use, so manipulation is a part of narcissism, and the tool for a somatic narcissist is their physical appearance, their body, their sexual desirability, all that.
Well said.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still learning. This is great.
Yeah. And apparently this is one that's, I think we're seeing more of based on the research because of, social media. And again, like social media is an awful place for narcissists to go, right? Because they're looking at other people, and I'm sure for like a somatic narcissist, they're seeing other people and the jealousy and the envy and the rage, like it's there.
Yeah.
So that's the somatic narcissist. And so these are the different types of narcissists. And again, there's a spectrum. In order to be diagnosed with NPD, you need to meet at least 5 of the 9 criteria. And just remember, just because you're one of those that loves to take selfies, that doesn't make you a narcissist, right? You need multiple things to be a narcissist.
Yes, you could be a simple old carrot. And Alina, you've done a lot of really good research on statistics around narcissism. So why don't we go through that with the listeners? I think a lot of them are very interesting.
Love it.
So the first one's around the prevalence of NPD. And studies estimate that 1 to 6% of the general population may have narcissistic personality disorder. And it's tough to get a number for people with narcissistic personality style, but it's estimated that about 1 in every 5 people may have enough narcissism to cause problems in relationships. And it may be worse in certain industries like media, finance, law, politics, with celebrities as well. So 1 in 5, that's 20% of people.
And again, like you would have to go see a clinician to be diagnosed, right?
Right.
So for those who are diagnosed, it's about 1 to 6%, which, that's quite a range. Like, is it 1%?
It is quite a range.
But it's tough, again, according to the research. And I think it was Dr. Ramani who said that if she were to guess, she would say that about 20% of the population has some form of narcissism, and that it's actually probably even higher. And a lot of them are men. And Dr. Ramani also said that that's kind of a myth in that in certain types of narcissism, you do see a balance of men and women. So like for vulnerable narcissists, it's about the same. But for like the grandiose or the malignant narcissist, you see more in men. But overall, the percentage that you would find online is about 50 to 75% of individuals with NPD are male.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I know you had alluded to this earlier, but cultural influence. Some researchers have suggested that narcissism has been rising in recent decades, possibly linked to societal factors such as social media, which encourages that self-promotion, validation seeking. Was there anything around like, do they think that number is going to continue rising? 'Cause
oh, girl.
we're screwed.
Yeah. I'm sure it is.
That's wild.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, and you see it more in like metropolitan areas as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to continue talking about this. I mean, we talked about doing even another episode, maybe with a psychologist or like, a trained clinician, because I would love to get into more of the genetics, right? Or just the early childhood experience.
Yes.
With the parent. Maybe your parent is a narcissist. So how does a parent that's a narcissist, how does that affect childhood trauma? And how does that, impact whether or not you raise a narcissist, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Why don't we go into how to navigate a relationship with a narcissist? I mean, I think it's important to remember, like to say again that we are not psychologists or clinicians, and these are things that have been found through our research and experience, especially in our lives.
Yeah.
So the first big one is setting boundaries. So this is in a relationship, whether it's romantic, familial, or professional, they all can be challenging. And so setting boundaries, because narcissists often push limits, it's crucial to clearly establish what's acceptable and what is not, and then enforce consequences when boundaries are crossed.
Yeah.
This is so hard. I mean, obviously it's very situation dependent, right?
Yeah. And the other thing, I remember reading this and it really had like a profound impact on me. And I want everyone to remember this, right? So I'll speak for myself. I used to justify certain people's behaviors, right? And I used to say things like, well, he had a tough childhood. I think his dad might be crazy. His sisters are not very nice to him, this, that, and the other. Like there was this empathy, right? And almost like I would excuse the behavior, right? And so it's just important to remember that, sure, that can be true. It can be true that that person had a tough childhood or, had a tough go at it. However, it doesn't make their behavior acceptable.
Right.
So, sure, those things are true, but it's also true that their behavior is not acceptable.
Yes.
And I think for people like us who are caring and empathetic and flexible and understanding, it's really hard, especially if you're married to that person. Right. Or in my case, like I had a friend for over 30 years and I always just excused behaviors. I knew the behaviors were wrong, but I excused them. And so it can be that, sure, they had a tough life or whatever.
Absolutely.
But it's also true that it's not acceptable. And if you set those boundaries and they're still, displaying behaviors that are unacceptable, hopefully you can get to that place where you just bow out and say, I'm not doing this. It's toxic. It's not healthy. And I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah. Like you did.
Yeah, girl. It's really, and I do empathize with people where it's not that easy to walk away, right?
Of course.
Sure, you can set those boundaries, but man, oh man, is it hard. Especially since many of us love people that are narcissists, whether it's, in our families or in our friendships. So it's to me, it's a little bit easier to navigate at work because I certainly know narcissists at work.
Yeah.
It's a bit easier to navigate, right? But when it's an intimate relationship, it's tough.
Yeah, there's not that emotional attachment to it as much when it's a work relationship, but still challenging.
Yeah. What else can they do?
They could avoid, so we need to avoid personalizing their behavior. So because narcissists are often self-centered and emotionally distant, their actions are usually more about their own insecurities than a reflection of you. Gosh, I feel like getting this in can minimize so much emotional pain, right? So there's that. The third one is don't engage in power struggles. So like we said, narcissists thrive on control and having control. So you trying to win against them often leads to frustration and way worse. So staying calm and not feeding into those emotional games is crucial. Do you want to go to the next one?
Manage expectations. So recognize that a narcissist may not be able to provide the emotional support or validation that you seek, and focus on maintaining self-worth and independence. You could hit your head against that wall over and over and over again, but they're not changing. They are who they are, and again, I know this is tough to do, but you really need to manage those expectations. And, the other thing that Angelina and I were talking about was when you think of your own personality, right? Whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, someone who's flexible versus someone who's a bit more rigid. You might be type A. You might be, I don't know, disorganized. You might be agreeable, right? These are different personality styles. You might be a generous person versus someone who isn't generous, right? And someone comes to you and says, you know what, Angeline, you're too rigid. You should be more flexible.
That has happened.
Or, how was that easy for you to do?
Absolutely
Okay.
not.
Or somebody comes to you and says, you're too much of an introvert. You should really be more of an extrovert.
Sure.
Right? You're too generous. You should be less generous.
Right.
How difficult is that for you to do?
Of course. It seems damn nearly impossible.
Damn nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So to think that a narcissist is capable of making changes,
right,
regardless of how often you tell them, or even if they go to therapy, do you think they're going to change?
Yeah.
No, they're not. So the only thing that you can do is manage your own expectations.
Yeah.
And not expect them to change to meet your needs, because you're not going to get it. And you might get, little peeks of it every now and again, like a little sneak peek here and there. And that might be, to continue to dominate you or control you. Or maybe they had a good day, right? So you see that good side, but it's definitely not going to be consistent.
No.
So.
Well said. Get help. Prioritize your mental health. Seek counseling or support groups that help process the emotional toll of dealing with a narcissist. I'm sure there are many out there. But yeah, I would imagine therapy can really help navigate.
Yeah, and support. I think that's a really big one, right?
Absolutely.
Having friends and loved ones who support you can really help with just your mental health.
Yeah. And then communicating effectively. So making sure you're clear, concise, and non-confrontational language when communicating is key, because narcissists often respond better to messages that don't threaten their self-image, self-esteem, etc.
You can never call them out.
Yeah.
Never. You can never call a narcissist. I'll just say this really quickly.
Yeah.
I was talking to a narcissist recently. It's a friend, acquaintance. And he was talking about how he's no longer friends with his longtime friend because he's a narcissist. And I was telling him all these things about, the characteristics of a narcissist, this, that, and the other. And he was just kind of squirming in his chair. I could just see how uncomfortable he was. And he actually asked, he was like, do you think narcissists know that they're narcissists?
He asked that?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
But anyhow, you can never tell a narcissist they're a narcissist because they're never gonna own up to it.
Wow. And they sure as hell are not the ones putting themselves in therapy to try to figure it out.
Nope.
All right. And finally, know when to walk the F away. If the relationship, this goes without saying, becomes too toxic and damaging, it is necessary for you to distance yourself or cut ties. And, for the sake of self-preservation.
I know.
This is so hard.
So hard.
And again, there's so many layers here with the types of relationships that we're talking about.
Especially if you have kids.
Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
So.
Yeah, it's
complex.
It's scary. It's just terrifying.
Yeah. So narcissism is a complex psychological trait that can exist on a spectrum. Remember, it's a spectrum from mild personality traits to a clinical disorder. And understanding the different forms of narcissism and how to recognize traits of this, narcissistic personality disorder, hopefully can help you navigate relationships, whether professional or personal, with individuals who exhibit narcissistic behaviors. Maintain clear boundaries, right? Seek professional help, practice self-care. These things are really essential for managing interactions with narcissists and protecting your own self well-being. We also want to reiterate that we're not clinicians or experts in the field of this very complex topic. This episode is intended to share information based on our research and our personal experience only. As stated earlier, I think this is, again, a topic that I think we're going to have probably a couple more episodes on because I'm sure we'll have questions, and I think it'd be really helpful for all of us to talk to an expert on the matter. So we really do hope that this was useful in some way.
Yes, exactly. And we would love to hear from you. Please share with us if you've, had the unfortunate experience of being in a relationship with a narcissist and how that impacted you, and any strategies or tips to cope. We'd really appreciate hearing from you. And at the end of each episode, we like to ask one another and encourage you, the listener, to ask yourself what is bringing you joy lately. Because despite the ugliness and pain that life can bring, there's always something for which to be joyful. Mm-hmm. Alina, do you want to go first?
Yeah, and I think I have an appropriate thing that brought me joy just in the last couple of days. My car wouldn't turn on, and I panicked, and I called a person who's pretty handy with cars, but also a narcissist. And I was so thrown off by the end. Like, I had to get off the phone with him because I'm like, what did he just tell me to do? What the heck was that all about? And it's almost like he was just trying to sound like he was helpful, but he wasn't at all. He just confused me even more. And then it was very timely because then my friend Pete called, and he's like, hey, is your car okay? What happened? And he was with his partner, and he's like, oh, my partner can come change the battery for you. And I'm like, he can? What? Like, they were here, it took like 30 minutes, and it was just really nice to feel supported, right?
Yeah.
And he even said, oh, you could have probably done this on your own, but maybe, right? Like, maybe I could have found someone to give me a jump and then, go to AutoZone with me to get a new battery. But it was just nice to feel supported, and so I'm grateful for that. And that definitely gave me a lot of joy. And again, it was just the polar opposite of this toxic it was really toxic. Like, it completely threw me off, and I was so much more stressed after that interaction.
Wow.
And then to be met by this other interaction of my friend that was like, hey, I'm genuinely here to help you and support you, just gave me a lot of joy.
Oh, I'm so glad. Kudos to those types of people. Why are you laughing?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all.
I love that. I'm so glad. And that's bringing you joy. What a relevant and timely situation. I'm glad your car is okay.
Thanks. What's bringing you joy lately?
Well, I was going to go to a product, but I don't know. The transition might feel a little harsh, but it's okay. I love the L'Occitane Shea hand cream that you've introduced me to probably 20 years ago. It is time and time again the best hand cream on earth. Like, nothing like it. I don't care how much more expensive something is. It's nothing. There's nothing like it. So yeah, just this winter, both Andrew and our hands just have been so cracky and rough. And my sister got me like a nice little set of hand creams from L'Occitane, just like mini ones, and they're all over the house now. And I just love putting it on. It's a luxurious feeling. And I know you know this because you're the one that told me about it.
It's the best.
It's the best.
And the smell.
Everything about it. It's not overpowering. It's such a light scent. And it lasts through washes. L'Occitane, sponsor us, please.
Please.
So yeah, that is what's bringing me joy.
That's a great one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On that note.
On that note. Yeah, so many of you ask how to best support our podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode and you like the show in general, please share it with a friend. We appreciate your continued love and support. That's all we've got for you today. See you next time on Tell Me More and Then Some.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please rate and review to help us reach more listeners.
To learn more, make sure to follow us on all the socials at moreandthensomepod.
Join us for new episodes every Wednesday on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Until next time, stay curious, learn more, and talk about it.